Hi.
No, thanks.
What are you doing?
Oh my god, why is your breath so awful?
What you been eating, girl?
So soft. Is that enough attention for right now? Is that enough attention?
Ow!
She demands the pets. Hi kids, welcome back to another pizza party. I'm Mrs. Pizza. This needy little bitch right here is Weenie. You have eyeball gook. Also, what is it with people that have dogs and just totally cleaning out their dog's eyeball gook without a second thought? Just going right in there. Must be like what it's like when you have kids and I got a booger and you just go for it. If you're a parent, tell me, is that something you do or did I just make that up? Anyways, cheese. You'll never guess where cheese is. Hi, Winnie. Yes. No, I know that I'm currently available for pets, but I'm talking. We're looking at Cheese, who looks suspicious. Did you just turn around and see who we were looking at? She was like, is there someone behind me that you guys are staring at together? All right, sidetracked already. We are here today to do a recent reads. Why? Because if I wait too long, it's too many books and it's overwhelming. So I like to do this while it's a little bit short. But that has not really been serving me well this year because I am incredibly far behind on these. So I'm going to add, I think, like an extra 2 books than what I usually do in recent reads. Let's hope that my voice doesn't fail me. Let's hope that I remember what some of these books are about because it's been so long. I don't even remember. Winnie. All right, let's talk about some books. The first book we are going to be talking about is An Education in Malice, and this is by S.T. Gibson, the author of A Dowry of Blood, which this book is a reimagining, retelling of Dracula from the point of view of one of Dracula's brides. It is beautiful and gothic and romantic and about a toxic relationship and polyamorous, and good God, is this a good book? So I decided to pick up the most recent, not true. I think this author actually has had 2 books come out recently. This would have made sense for me to pull these books down before I started doing all this. And Education in Malice is a reimagining of the story of Carmilla. This is a classic story. This is kind of touted as the first vampire story and went on to inspire vampire lore. It is said to be the inspiration for Dracula and other gothic vampire novels that came afterwards. This is also sapphic. So I thought I had a really good time with this author's Dracula reimagining. Let's try out their Carmilla reimagining. You might have seen us talking about this in the comments if you looked at the comments in any of my other videos. Positive remarks. The atmosphere of this dark academia, this girl named Laura goes to this prestigious college. I believe it's like in the Northeast. Is it in Massachusetts? I don't know, but somewhere just collegiate in the 60s. I feel like everyone's wearing tartan skirts and riding bicycles with baskets on it. I don't know where that came from, but it's taking place in the 60s on this college setting in this prestigious writing program that Laura has just been admitted into. She has an academic rival within this group that is Carmilla. And Carmilla, she's the opposite of Laura in a lot of ways. She's self-confident. She's got like a short bob and she wears like red lipstick. Carmilla is everything. And these two immediately become rivals within this group, but it turns into something more. There's this dark undercurrent of things are going on. Carmilla has more knowledge about it. Laura gets sucked into this world. There's poetry. There's books. There's academia. There's girls kissing each other. It's very... The first half of this book, the beginnings of this book, the vibes were immaculate. The second half of this book falters a little bit for me because the tone kind of shifts a little bit. Not that I didn't enjoy this. I did enjoy this, but I feel like that second half, the introduction of our big bad, our new antagonist, what's going on. There's a few things that happened in the second half of this book that did not necessarily work for me as well as the first half. That being said, there was a lot of things mostly happening in the first half that were the atmosphere, the environment. Just I was able to picture where these characters were and this poetry element as well. There was a lot of romanticized dark academia feelings in the first half of this book. And I'm disappointed that I didn't like it more. I feel like of the 2 books, Dowry of Blood is definitely the stronger, but I didn't hate this book. It's not a bad book. It didn't hit me as much as the other book I read from this author. The next book I picked up after that was Thrum, and this is a short horror romance novella in space. Sci-fi romance horror, which I was like, yes, sure, that sounds nonsensical, and I would like to partake, please. This was fine. This is incredible incredibly short, and I think that works to its benefit. I feel like this was tonally kind of weird, spacey kind of weird. It's one of those books that I had completely forgot that I had read until I went back and was looking at like, what are the next books I need to talk about? And I was like, oh, yeah, I read that one too with this space weirdness. This is the story of Amy. She wakes up on a spaceship. She's the last surviving member of the crew of her spaceship. She puts out an SOS, I am in distress signal. It is answered by another ship, and this ship has a man on it named Dorian who pulls her ship to his ship. Things are weird. Dorian seems very out of place. Things start spiraling. Amy can't trust what's going on. Twists and turns and sexy things happen. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't read more from this author, but I don't want to ever read this book again. How about that? I didn't really like it. I didn't hate it. I honestly have forgotten a lot of it already, which says a lot about it as well. For me to like not like something, but also just feel kind of blah about it. It's horror sci-fi with sexy times. Like if that sounds like something you're into, it's such a short book. I think it was like 120 something pages. Just pick it up. See if you're into it. It won't waste too much of your time if you're not. The next book I picked up after that was Long Live Evil. And this is the first book in a new series. The amount of authors that have little blurbs, bing, 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 on the back of this book, I thought boded well for it. This book I actually did end up enjoying just fine, but I think there was a decent part in the middle that I wasn't having that much fun. So this is the story of Ray, and she is terminally ill. Ray has been ill for a while. She's a young woman who is suffering from cancer that has just decimated her physically, mentally. She's kind of at death's door when a mysterious character walks in and says, hey, wouldn't you like to visit your favorite fantasy book series? Ray makes a Faustian deal because there are stipulations to this deal, and she has a timeline in which she must complete a task in this fantasy world that she wakes up in. The kicker is that Ray does not wake up as the magical good guy princess that she thought she would. She doesn't even really wake up as herself. She wakes up as the bad guy. She is the villain of her favorite fantasy story. I need to back up because that is the synopsis that you kind of go in with, but I feel like it kind of sets you up for failure. See, Ray and her sister have a very close relationship. Ray's younger sister is the person in her life, and Ray's younger sister is the one that is obsessed with these fantasy books. Ray is a fan because her sister is a fan. She enjoys the books, but she's never really spent a lot of time reading them. Her sister reads them to her. So this fandom is something that Ray is not necessarily a person within. She has a close relationship with someone who is in the fandom. So Ray shows up in this fantasy world, and though she knows a lot of the characters and their names, she doesn't necessarily remember exactly what happened in this fantasy world to either get these characters where they need to be or what they've already been through to get them where they are. So Ray is a very interesting perspective. I liked that because I liked the idea, instead of this person being just all-knowing, omniscient about what's happened in this world, we have someone who knows some of this stuff, but not everything. There's going to be surprises. She's trying to rack her brain and remember how things happened. And she almost immediately starts fucking up, because you're going to if you don't know exactly beat for beat what's supposed to happen. That being said, I think some of my frustration with the middle bit, the part that started getting me really irritated, was with Ray's reluctance to recognize her impact on this world. I think there was a lot of things that would have pushed any normal character into making revelations earlier. I think because this is supposed to be a series, we needed revelations to come very late in the book so that we can then have another arc within the second book. It was frustrating that Ray was not necessarily picking up on what was getting put down. I think that the fact that some of these things you are supposed to get before her because you are the reader of the story and you are following characters when they're not around her as well, but she was a little bit hard-headed about some of the revelations. She just didn't want to have them. How about that? She was making a decided choice to not have mental growth in the situation she was in, and it was frustrating. That being said, we are not following a perfect person. We are following a young woman who's been through a very traumatic couple of years. She's thrust into a fantasy world. She's trying to get her bearings, but she's also aware that she has been thrust into a fantasy world. I think a lot of my frustrations were probably because she was acting like a real person probably would in this situation instead of a normal character. That being said, there was a slow bit before you get to the twist at the end, which was very satisfying and makes you definitely want to continue on in the series. You're either going to like it or you're not, and there's not much you can really do about that. I didn't really sell that one. I will continue on with the series is how I should put it. Like, I do want to see where these characters are going. That being said, Ray was not my favorite character. It was interesting too that side characters became the characters that I'm really interested in their story, where you're watching things happening and they hope they're going to unfold certain ways. I will continue on with the series. The next book I picked up after that was Reluctant Immortals, and I picked this one up because the premise sounded up my alley, and the cover is colorful and fun, and I thought, hey, what a beautiful cover. Let's try this out. This is the story of Lucy and Bertha, and they are two immortals. And they're two immortals that, if you've read some classic literature, you would probably recognize. See, Lucy is Lucy from the story of Dracula, who, if you've read that story, you know is Dracula's unfortunate victim and good friend to Mina Harker. And Bertha, our character, Bert, I believe is how they refer to her, and Bertha is Bertha Rochester, as in Jane Eyre, if you haven't read Jane Eyre, I don't want to spoil it for you, but Bertha Rochester is a character in that story, and she's not one of the main ones, but she is very pivotal to how the story ends up. So we have these two characters that are kind of like side characters that have very tragic backstories within these Gothic classic literary works. And we have now brought them into I believe this all takes place in like the 60s, so they've been taken into a more modern time period. They've been surviving since their respective time periods. Okay, sorry, out of nowhere my battery died. I swear, it said it was totally fine. There was no warning. It just said bye-bye and went night-night. Okay, where was I? So we have Lucy and Bertha, and they are both characters that have become immortal through different circumstances, and they are now living in the 1960s in California in the summer of love, right? Everybody's hippy-dippy walking around, and these two have their dark pasts that are finally catching up with them. They have these other characters from the novels they're involved in that they are dealing with circling around, but we then have the backdrop of the 60s with all of these hippies and transient young people that are doing drugs and nobody knows where anybody's from. I think that this really struggled, one, because there was no real reason that Bertha needed to be Bertha. The backstory to her and her ties to Jane Eyre novel and all the other characters from Jane Eyre were so completely different from the original text that it was basically just a name that you recognized. But also there was a lot of repetition in this. There was a lot of heavy-handed dumping on you with certain things. Everything was so heavy-handed, but yet still kind of convoluted. What am I supposed to be taking away from this? Girl power, I guess. It wasn't done well. I didn't like this. I ended up giving it 2 stars. I think that the characters made really weird choices. There was no real reason for these characters to be the literary characters they were because the stories were changed so much, and there was no real reason for them to be those characters. There was just a lot of misses in this, and I didn't enjoy it, which was unfortunate because it was a very beautiful cover. There also was no reason that I just didn't like it. If you want to read it, do your thing, but I did not enjoy this, and I don't think there's any real reason for me to recommend it to anyone. The next book I picked up after that was A Werewolf's Guide to Seducing a Vampire, and this is from a series of small-town paranormal romances by Sarah Hawley. I'll put it up on the screen. I don't remember the name of this series, but so far I had read the first book in this series and ended up DNFing it just because it felt like it wasn't quite there yet. I picked up this story, ended up liking it more, and the one thing that was my takeaway from this is I think this author will eventually get into the groove. I don't know if it's going to be within the series or a future series that they write, but this feels like an early work of a romance writer you're really going to love in the future. They're almost there. They're so close, and I'm rooting for them. They're going to get there soon. This is the story of Ben, and he is a werewolf, and he runs a garden shop. You've met him in previous books within the series. He is a very sweet and sensitive and quiet soul, but comes from this big, loud family full of werewolves. When one day he, I believe, had a little too much to drink at a holiday party or something, but Ben is on some eBay-ish website, sees some sort of silly listing for a crystal that contains a witch. He buys it thinking it's a joke, and then when it arrives on his doorstep and he realizes, oh, it's not a joke, there's a vampire trapped inside of this. And basically, like a genie in a bottle, you can release this vampire from the crystal or put her back in, depending on how you feel at the time. But she has to do whatever you tell her to do. Her name is Eleonora, and she is a spicy, spicy French vampire lady. She's actually a lot of fun because she has spent centuries with a witch who was the previous owner of the crystal that she resides in, who basically used her for things that Eleonora was not a huge fan of. She was taking out this witch's enemies, hurting a lot of people, and she's just tired of that existence. And Ben is just this sweet, sweet man who is trying to figure out how to give Eleonora her freedom, but also doesn't want to tell everyone that he accidentally purchased Eleonora on the internet. It's sweet, it's silly, there's different things going on within this small town. Eleonora is spicy and saucy, and Ben is just such a sweet, caring person that they work well together, and I enjoyed this just fine. I'm really excited to see where this author goes in the future because I just think they are so close to being a really, really great paranormal romance author. There's so many elements to this that they have improved on since the first book, and they're just getting better with every book. They're gonna get there. I have hope. The next book I picked up after that was the Court of Tricksters, and this is something that I absolutely really disliked. This is a fantasy romance, and it is the Fae Knight Court Duke, and he has to go and get his fated mate, and his fated mate is this witch, and her name is Rain, and she lives in the woods, and she has a small group of humans nearby that she has taken under her wing, taken under her care and protection. And the Duke of the Night Court, who has antlers, I'm pretty sure he has antlers, shows up, and he's like, hey, we're supposed to be mates, and she's like, yeah, no thanks, sir. And he's like, no, it's important for political reasons, but I'll never love you. And then he kidnaps her, and I hope it's coming across as chaotic as it felt. They're both supposed to be it was so I'm not gonna fall in love with her, but not in love with her, but I can't live without her. And she's like, I mean, he kidnaps me, but I guess he's dreamy. I did not like this at all. Did I even finish this? I don't even remember what happened. I think that my brain was like, girl, you don't need this information. We can live our life without ever knowing how this ends up. It was not written well. The romance was all over the place. There was this reluctance on both of their parts to be romantically involved with each other, but then the mate bond was making it happen. But it wasn't in a fun way. It felt like an involuntary, non-consensual attraction that they were having to each other until they eventually succumbed to the attraction, which is not how I like my fated mate soulmates to feel. This I didn't like. I didn't like it. No. And the last book that we're going to talk about is So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. Rachel Harrison writes books that are using horror elements to talk about other things. And so I like to think of them as more cozy horror, although sometimes scary or gross or dark things happen. They don't necessarily feel incredibly intimidating horror. They're a little more accessible. My favorite Rachel Harrison book still stands as Such Sharp Teeth, which is Rachel Harrison's werewolf book. Highly, highly recommend that one, using the metaphor of turning into a werewolf with your bodily autonomy. She has a sister who's going through a pregnancy, and so the changing of a woman's body from pregnancy, a changing of a woman's body when she's transforming into a werewolf. It was good. It was well done, and it was gooey. It was very gooey. But I liked that one. I have found since then, I have not actively disliked any of Rachel Harrison's books that I've picked up, but they just haven't been as big of a hit for me. So Thirsty was another one that I enjoyed, but it was just kind of fine. This is the story of Sloane. She has an upcoming birthday that she's not looking forward to. And so she goes on a weekend birthday retreat with her wild world trotting best friend Naomi. They go off to this cold, snowy place together to spend her birthday a weekend and kind of drink and have fun and just forget about life for a little while, because Sloane's home life is not that great. Her husband's infidelities keep happening. She's stagnant. She's just feeling old and stuck and unfulfilled. And so her and Naomi go off on this weekend. They end up at a party, and it just might happen to contain vampires. And then Sloane and Naomi are kind of sucked into this world they didn't know existed. I feel like, and this was my main takeaway, I feel like this would have worked for me much better. Not that I disliked it. It just isn't a new favorite, but it would have worked much better for me in a visual format. So if this was a TV show or a movie and you got to see these things happening and there was a lot more subtle cues to attractions or dislikes or relationships, I think that there was a lot of little things that would have gotten you much more invested in these characters. This is fine. It's the story of Sloane having to deal with vampires. There you go. I will say one of the things that kept taking me out of it was Sloane talking about how old she was. And when she would, what was she, like 35? Not even? I don't know. But she kept talking about how old she was. And though I will say when you are getting older, you look at every age you are and you're like, good God, I'm so old. But like when somebody had said, when they're like 35 and they're like, oh, I'm so old and wrinkles. I was like, girl, calm down. You aren't even that old. But I guess perspective is everything. If you're 25, 35 probably sounds pretty old, right? Do I really need to look it up? She wasn't old enough to be talking about how old she was. Unless you're 20. And then she was old enough to be talking about how old she was. But I also think that is something that just like we start telling girls as soon as they're 16 that like by the time they're 25, they're ancient, wrinkly bags of used up leather. And that's just not true. I think there are things that change as you get older. And there are certain things that you wouldn't necessarily do anymore, what you did when you were 21, and the thought of doing it at 31 makes you want to vomit. That doesn't necessarily mean you're old. It just means that you've learned some things. And also, you have physical limitations, and you're not necessarily always as limber. It's mostly alcohol. You cannot drink like you used to when you were 21. The thought of having a hangover for 3 days after having 3 drinks, it'll really stop you in your tracks from, taking those shots at the bar. You know what? I'm going to stop right there. There were things about this I really enjoyed. I like Rachel Harrison's writing. There were things about this I didn't enjoy. And there were some things about this that were just misses for me. And a lot of that had to do with how some of these problems, these plot points were resolved, where the story was going, the romantic elements in this as well. I think that there should have been, although there was a decent amount of focus on Naomi and Sloane's relationship, their friendship was weird to me. It was one of those friendships that you are still friends with this person because you've been friends with this person for so long, not that because you actually would be friends with them if you met them now, which I think is a good place to start the friendship off in the beginning of the story. But I don't necessarily think it changed that much throughout the story as well. But that doesn't mean that I'm not looking forward to picking up anything that Rachel Harrison comes out with in the future. But that, kids, is where we're going to end this recent reads. That's plenty of books. I talked about a lot of books. I will continue to try and catch up on all these recent reads, but there's no telling if I'll ever get there. If you had fun hanging out with me and the dogs, please subscribe. I hope you're reading good books out there wherever you are, and I'd love to hear about them. And I'll see you next time.